This is Colin O'Keefe for LXBN TV. Dewey LeBouef situation, one of a collapsing law firm, and then of course the criminal indictments, is one that certainly other law firms want to avoid. But in today's changing legal economy, nothing is certain. Joining me now to share his thoughts on what other law firms can learn from Dewey's situation is Andrew Jillson. He is the director with Hayse LLC, where he specializes in helping law firms in transition and is an author on the blog Managing Law Firm Transition. Andy, first, how does a law firm like Dewey avoid ending up in a situation like they found themselves in? When you wrote on this, you said that self-preservation and self-interest played a big role in this. So how can law firms protect themselves from ending up in a situation like Dewey?
Well, you have to understand that the more aggressive a strategy that a law firm employs, the greater risk that it may face. When an aggressive strategy is adopted, it is always very important for the law firm to understand the risks that it is facing. In the case of Dewey, it actually employed not just one aggressive strategy, but multiple aggressive strategies simultaneously. And it doesn't appear to have adequately addressed the risk. I mean, first aggressive strategy that Dewey employed was actually the merger of Dewey Ballantine and LeBouef Lamb. We know that mergers have about a 50% chance of success. And so right there, the initial bringing together of two firms to form Dewey created risk. And secondly, Dewey Ballantine and LeBouef Lamb, it is reported, had their own issues. There was deferred maintenance at both law firms that wasn't addressed prior to the merger, but they brought these two firms together. So that compounded the risk at the combined Dewey. On top of that, and one of the first things you do when you merge a firm is you try and integrate the firms and bring them together to create one firm and one culture. In the case of Dewey, it didn't do that, or appears not to have done that, but it also embarked upon a very aggressive lateral hiring strategy, where it was bringing in laterals from all around its markets to try and grow the firm. We know from recent reporting by the American Lawyer that lateral hiring strategies are not necessarily effective. So there too is risk that was added to the Dewey plate. On top of that, Dewey granted or induced people to come to the firm as laterals by guaranteeing contracts. Not only is that a questionable strategy from an economic standpoint, but it also is very questionable from a cultural standpoint. In effect, it creates, multiple or a caste system. So a lesson to be learned from Dewey is that if you are going to engage in an aggressive strategy, understand the risk that that comes with that aggressive strategy, and then do not adopt or pursue too many aggressive strategies all simultaneously. In the case of Dewey, it combined Dewey Ballantine and LeBouef Lamb in October of 2007. And within a year, it's facing the Great Recession. It has all these issues that it had not been able to resolve, and it was incapable of dealing with the aspect of the Great Recession. So that's a lesson that we learned, from Dewey. The other thing is that firms should place a premium on great leadership that takes a long-term view for the institution, not just a short-term view. The leadership should have the courage and the communication skills to deal with unexpected news and adversity. And clearly, leadership should not be motivated by compensation or arrangements that mean that they can put a Band-Aid on a problem because it's in their self-interest to do so, instead of taking a long-term view. Firms should also deal with adversity and deal with it straight up. Need to address the root causes of the problems and not just try, as I say, put a Band-Aid on the problem. firms should also monitor performance, monitor it closely, and deal with issues that they are able to see when they're monitoring that performance. Do it humanely, but nonetheless deal with those issues. It doesn't appear that Dewey attempted to do that. It was too busy pursuing the aggressive strategies. A couple other things that lessons to be learned or things to avoid is avoid excessive debt. Dewey appears to have had excessive debt, not only to banks, but it also had debt to the partners to whom it had guaranteed contracts. And then finally, try and operate more transparently. It is clear from the reporting that Dewey did not do that.
I see, and I think you've expounded on a lot of these already, but in looking at Dewey and looking at things towards the end, are there things that they could have done differently to make a better effort at saving themselves?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most important things that it could have done was it could have hired competent and reputable professional help to assist them through this workout or this restructure. But instead, the small group in management decided that they would attempt a do-it-yourself restructure. A professional who is experienced would provide a alternative voice, an alternative view to some of the things that Dewey actually did, and perhaps prevent Dewey would have prevented Dewey from taking those steps. It is a professional restructuring advisor is not going to be an advocate of cooking the books. Its reputation goes beyond that engagement, and it will try and find a lasting and enduring solution. And in most instances, the restructuring professional's compensation is not tied to any specific short-term outcome. It may be tied perhaps to a long-term outcome, but not a short-term outcome. Dewey could have dealt with its problems as they arose in November of 2008 and dealt with them directly. It might have been painful, and it might have been unpleasant to deal with them, but had they dealt with them directly, promptly, and forthrightly, the result might have been very different. And then another thing that firms should never try and do is solve their problems with cute practices or sharp practices. The problem with that is that they don't solve the root of the problem. They don't deal with the issue that faces the law firm. You're more than likely going to get caught. And when you do get caught, you're going to have no credibility to try and solve the problem. So I think that had Dewey done some of those things, and other law firms facing transition do those sorts of things, then there's a better chance of surviving a crisis than what we saw from Dewey's outcome.
Definitely, definitely. It seems like after everything they went through and all the efforts they made, some more dubious than others, they ended up in just about the worst case scenario. Once again, that was Andrew Jillson of Hayse LLC. For more of his insight, be sure to visit managinglawfirmtransition.com. Thank you for joining me today, Andy.
Thank you for having me.